Good day to everybody. Thank you for being here in this short session. Let me thank in particular Trine, Bill and Brian Coat to organize together with others this wonderful event, this great conference, and for inviting me to moderate this session. I am Federico Etro from the University of Florence, and I recently also became a co-editor of the Journal of Cultural Economics. And also I should thank in this occasion publicly the board for appointing me in this position. It's a very exciting position. It's very interesting. I just started, and together with me is the other co-editor, Doug Noonan, who is here, will be the main speaker of this conference from Indiana University, an experienced cultural economist and also an expert of other fields like environmental economics, urban economics, and more. And we started working together very nicely, so I'm very happy also to be here, and maybe I will try to help him to answer some questions. Please make sure you ask questions writing on the website, and Doug will try to answer. So the topic of this session is reflections on publishing in cultural economics. I want to notice that is publishing in cultural economics, so not just in the Journal of Cultural Economics. So this should be something also potentially wider. And let me also say that while as editor, of course, we are looking for the best paper, we try to do our best to select the best papers. It's also important for a healthy field to have a flow of ideas and papers that arrive sometimes occasionally to top journals with interest for a general audience. And of course, this strengthens also the field journal and the field in general. So I will leave now the word to Doug. Please, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Good afternoon all, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. This is going to be my little bit of reflections on publishing and cultural econ, in particular in the journal, but more broadly as well. And I'm hoping to leave a lot of time here for some Q&A at the end, but the quick outline is a few of my reflections about the state of cultural economics, and then a bit more about the state of the journal and where I think we're going, and some looking ahead bits. But make sure you post your comments and questions in the Q&A. We'll be monitoring those and looking forward for a good discussion at the end of this. So after a few days here virtually at the ACI meetings, I'm struck confirming the slide that I wrote before I got here, which is that cultural economics, I think, is a very rich field, and not just for the rich. That makes it exciting and interesting to me. I see that it is a big topic that's at the center of a lot of what's going on in society's concerns. A lot of the topics and challenges facing us all today are actually central to cultural economics, whether it's issues of gatekeepers and distribution, experiential goods, IP, class issues, disruptive innovation, virtuality, all these things in some ways that defined my 2020 are central to cultural economics. This is a field that's ripe for connections to major shifts in society and in technology, whether we're talking about digital or media, justice and identity, things like platforms and gigs in the sharing economy. These are things that economics should have a lot to talk about and a lot to contribute. The classics in our field still matter, whether we're talking about superstars or addiction or cultural capital or cost diseases. These things are still present today as they ever were. And I think we're looking at maybe there's a generational gap. I'm waiting to see what the next big ideas and big articles are to come out in the area of cultural economics. They're likely already here. It'll just take a while to recognize them. But I think waiting for this next wave of big ideas to come out is one of the things I look for in thinking about the field. The other part I look for in thinking about the field is at the Journal of Cultural Economics, where I've been editing for a few years. So to give you an idea about what shows up in the Cultural Economics Journal, obviously you can read it yourself, and I hope you always do. I went in to the editorial manager system that Springer has that helps us manage the editorial process at the journal, and basically search for different words. So here's a list of words, and these are the number of submissions, not necessarily articles, but submissions that we've received over the past several years that have these words either in the title or in their list of keywords. So for instance, motion picture and film related things has appeared in 261 different submissions. Now that's 55 of those were actually accepted for publication. So you can see across this list, there's an idea of some of the big topics that we've touched on and the frequencies at which we touch on these things, not just in print, but also in the kinds of things that come across our desks. So obviously things like value and prices matter a lot, but music and movies are big topics for us, as are heritage and artists and labor side of things, as well as participation in consumption and other things such as fine arts, theater, performing arts show up a bit less frequently. So this is an interesting way to look at this, but more than just the topics, there's the content in terms of the theory and the style of pieces. And one thing we see is that there's actually not a lot of theory pieces that we're receiving at the Journal of Cultural Economics lately. Notions of theory and building theories and things just aren't very central to the contributions of most of the work that we publish. Usually the things we do are econometric pieces. They're motivated by theory, often in a fairly informal, abstract way, but a lot of it's econometrics using fairly standard estimators and inferential statistics and data drawn from a variety of sources. I also want to comment about the geography of who's writing for the journal, who this community is, at least as they appear in the journal. And it's still mostly OECD countries, but it's increasingly Asian and increasingly China. And that's a diversifying trend that goes beyond just Asia. In the last decade, we've doubled the number of countries as represented by authors who submit to us over the past 10 years. We haven't quite doubled the number of countries represented in print, but even that is diversifying. It's no longer concentrated in just 5 or 6 countries accounting for most of our publications. It's growing wider and wider each year. And so that's an interesting trend of what's going on at the journal. Another interesting trend that many are interested in, I know, are things like our impact factors. And so the bars here in the bar graph show how our impact factor has grown substantially since 5 years ago. The latest 2020 numbers are out now, and we're now a little over 2.3 in our impact factor. It's continuing to grow. And if we look across other indicators of impact, I pulled up some of these indicators stretching back a decade or so, whether we're looking at impact factors or H5 scores or site score or SNPs. And here's a sense of the time series for these other indicators of impact. And I think it's interesting. I went and bold-faced the highest numbers in each of these. And you can see that across these time series, it's either 2019 or 2020 that shows our highest impact by these different metrics. So hopefully we're not peaking, but it does show that the trend is still going up. How can we get this impacts to continue to rise? Well, my request and tip for everybody here is make sure you cite recent articles from the Journal of Cultural Economics. And when you write your papers and cite those journal articles, the more you can place your work in the best journals out there, the better. And just remember, look back to the journal and cite us. Other trends. We haven't increased the number of issues or the amount of articles per issue. So because we're getting more popular and we've roughly doubled the number of submissions we received in the last few years, our acceptance rate has fallen. It's now down around 13, 15% now. Much of that's a function of receiving what are essentially a lot more spam style submissions, things that have no business at the journal. So that drives down the acceptance rate. But it should suffice to say that we are getting more and more competitive and harder to get published at the JCE. Other trends, we're being cited a lot more, the top green line. We're not just self-citing, although the articles that we do publish do seem to be including more and more citations. So I wanted to get a slide here about the kinds of things that do get published. These are just my impressions. This isn't a technical bibliometric analysis. But generally, we publish conventional cultural economics topics. These are works that either support or build on prior work in the cultural economics field, and thus they have an easy fan base or it's easy for them to find supporters. Most of what we're doing is econometric work. The empirical context for most of this is in Europe, Australia, US, or Canada, although that is diversifying. We see more work done outside of that geographic context. Lots of the studies we publish are essentially of the sort of, but how do the results for this new context or new technology differ from prior results? That's a fairly common mode of production for the articles we publish. The articles we do publish generally have relatively little substantive policy connection. They have relatively little connection to other topics in the cultural economics field, and they have relatively little formal theory. But that's just, things that are successful. What about the things that aren't? Well, the things that we desk reject by and large come in and they're simply out of scope of the journal. Usually it's by subject. They're not at all on a cultural topic, but occasionally they're from another discipline that don't make any connections to the economics field. Sometimes they're just poor quality, way too premature or journalistic in style and not appropriate for us. And sometimes they just lack a sufficiently novel contribution. Things we do send out for review, why do they get rejected? Usually it's because of a poorly articulated contribution or some confusing framing. Sometimes it's for unoriginal or insufficient contributions or some fatal flaw in the empirical model or in the use of the theory that they're trying to use. Occasionally the data are deemed inadequate to the task or essentially they find that the readers can't get excited about it. And on some occasions, things don't end up getting past the review stage simply because the authors can't be bothered to take the reviewers' requests seriously. Sam Cameron, Federico's predecessor as the co-editor here, he and I made a list a few years ago of our big concerns, and I'm going to highlight a few of them. We don't have time to get into them. I want to get to the Q&A, but just to mention a few of them and to reiterate, our submission level is rising greatly, although it's not clear that the quality of these submissions are commensurately rising. We seem to have a world where there's almost an industrial production line of cranking out articles, and we're seeing more and more come to us. There's some skewness in the topics that we receive. We receive a lot of things on movies, for instance. Some of that's reflected in what actually makes it to print, but not always. We're concerned a bit about some of the fairly routine econometric papers we get that in some ways seem to be running regressions on conveniently accessible data and then sort of post hoc rationalizing the findings. These aren't the strongest papers accordingly. And we are seeing some papers that don't seem to be spending that much effort in the idea of the econometric development, whether it's the reporting on diagnostics showing specification searches and other robustness checks. These are some of the concerns we had. Maybe our biggest concern is the tendencies over the last several years about bibliographies and how we work with the literature we're citing and how we construct bibliographies. Many of these things seem to be sloppily done using tools that are out there now that weren't there a generation ago. Sometimes there's a tendency, and it seems to be growing, to essentially treat the literature review as if it's just an opportunity to list a bunch of previous works, not really what literature reviews are for. And as already mentioned, there's a concern here about how authors are responding to reviewers. All right, let's look forward a little bit, though. And I think we've got some interesting, I don't know, whether there's sort of decision points or forks in the road. It'll be interesting to see where this field develops to me. And I get this perspective, again, from sitting behind the editor's desk at the journal, but it's not just about the Journal of Cultural Economics. It's interesting to see how we develop as the cultural economics field, whether a lot of the work we're doing is developing cultural economics as its own field, or whether it's really the empirical context for work in other fields, whether it's public econ or IO or labor econ or something like that. And I think it remains to be seen how that balances out and how that balance shifts over time. And that speaks to the notions of boundaries and frontiers. And cultural economics to me is in a great position for making interdisciplinary connections and contributions. I think it'll be interesting to see how we exploit that potential in the future. But there's also a lot of other new frontiers or new boundaries to the field of cultural economics. And we start seeing some of this, and they're not necessarily new topics. Notions of craft work, for instance, isn't new, but it's fairly new in the cultural economics literature. Things like digital media and identity and group values are things that are starting to explore and seem to be at the frontier here. But there's other pieces where it's unclear, I think, whether these are boundaries of the field or more frontiers to expand, whether that's things like movies and TV or YouTube and video games, sport, entertainment more broadly, where the field draws its boundaries and what are the frontiers we're going to grow into will remain to be seen. I think we have topics like religion, cuisine, and fashion, even comedy, as Alan talked this morning about, or amateurism. There's a lot of areas that are ripe for development that are fairly underdeveloped at this point. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of that grow. So much of the new work we see at the journal coming in is really about new technologies or new contexts. Like there's been a study that was done in Holland. Now let's go see how it applies in Japan or something like this. And I'm personally interested in seeing more emphasis on newer ideas and newer theory come to the journal. And I'm also interested in seeing if we can shift, which is really swimming against the current here, but to shift more from industrial production of manuscripts to more craft work in producing the manuscripts. I think that's going to be a hard ask given the realities and incentives that many of us face. But it'll be interesting to see where that goes. At the journal specifically, you've seen that we just came out with our most recent special issue on digital and film, already up in online versus our next special issue on cultural entrepreneurship. And we're finalizing for next year a special issue on alternative finance in cultural sector. You can expect to continue to see special issues develop. We've got a couple more in the works, and we expect to continue to do about one of these each year on special topics. We're also looking into alternative manuscript types in addition to our basic original paper or short paper forms. We're interested in exploring and innovating in this type, although nothing's settled. And if something does come, it won't be for a while, but we're welcoming any input that anyone here might have on this. As we continue to try to expand our reviewer pool, we're also going to be revamping and revitalizing our editorial board. You should be seeing news about that in the coming months. All of this is in an effort to keep the journal up to speed and continuing to innovate and grow along with the community. We're getting a continued growth in submissions. We expect to see that. And we are not expecting to see our reviewer pool grow commensurately. This is going to mean rising standards for initial submissions in order for them to succeed at the journal. We're going to expect to see bigger ideas and better execution across the board, less niche papers, less convenience data, less descriptive work, and hopefully better and more economics and more integrative across the different fields or subfields in cultural economics. Looking ahead then, I want to make one last request, and that's to say, please say yes to referee invitations when you get them from me and Federico, and write thoughtful reviews. The journal only works because we've got such great volunteer pool of reviewers. Thank you all for doing it and making this possible. Please keep it up and please continue to contribute to this. It helps build the community, so everyone can help please build this community. It's a great group, as anyone who's been here for the last few days knows. Send us your best work, aim for quality, not quantity, write good literature reviews, really, not necessarily long ones, but good ones, and publish your work in great outlets, no matter where it is. And then when you do, look back and cite some recent Journal of Cultural Economics articles. Train your graduate students very well, aim high, think big ideas, not necessarily big data, and let's innovate and push the boundaries. And with that, I want to stop, let Federico jump in and see if he's got something to share. And also take a look. I'll take a moment now and look through some of the Q&A postings that have been there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug. Let me say that I agree pretty much with everything you said. We are on the same path as always. So I see that many questions are arriving at the end of your talk. So I will leave you to answer to some. Let me add just a few things. So since you say the main things, let me be a little broader, say what I personally would like ideally to see more in cultural economics. Three things. One is more theory. You already said that. This is not just a personal preference. It is not at all. I think the field, differently from other fields, did lack some more theory from the beginning, as there was in other fields. There is space to do more, to be more solid on theory foundations of many of our mainly empirical subfields. I give you an example, a paper I like. A few years ago, Spangers with Love published a nice paper, American Economic Review, on art trade. One of them was presenting yesterday, as a matter of fact. That's an excellent paper with good theory based on macro finance, something like that, and empirical support for it. That's an ideal of putting together the two things that is typical by now in many fields, and we would like to see. I would like to see more. Second thing, integrating more cultural economics with other fields. We are naturally close to industrial organization, public finance. We can do more cross-fertilization with other fields of economics. Waldvogel, also with the lecture of yesterday, gave many examples of this kind of combination that are very good for cultural economics. There is a paper I love from last year on Journal Political Economy by Giorcelli and Moser. They are not cultural economists, I think they are economic historians mainly, but they study the impact of copyright on creativity in opera with a wonderful data set. These are outstanding examples. Also to answer maybe to one, Trine Bill asking how many papers are outside the our journal in cultural economics. I mean, I don't have the statistic we should look at, but my impression is there are many, even if this is a small field, and often they are very good. The last point, integrating more potentially, have a look, be open to other fields. So as a matter of fact, other sciences. In art history, there is a lot that is being done. There is a book by Greenwald that is interesting, collecting data and doing quantitative analysis. Others are doing that in the style of cultural economics, but they're asking not only questions about the art market, but also about art history. Integration in these and other fields can be useful. I will stop here. I will just give maybe to conclude my suggestions to the young people. We had a wonderful young session in the first day of the conference. So my suggestion is in general to publish well. This is the topic of the session. Think about one thing, first of all. That's the most important, the research question. Once you find that, you are almost done, okay? You need more time, but you're almost done, because that's what matters. I always think if the research question sounds good for your mom, it means that is a good one, okay? Somebody that doesn't care about economics. And the second is, once you have done the theory and the empirics, you're not done. You have to do the second most important thing, that is to write well the paper. Read, write, adjust, leave it a few days, read it with a fresh mind, and keep doing it until it's perfectly polished, because that's the way that you also understand really the logic of what you're writing, what we write, because this applies to everybody. So this is for the young people. Of course, the old ones don't need this kind of suggestions. But the research question is the most important thing. So I will come to the questions. So I will read some of them, and I will leave Doug to answer to some. Now there are too many. So what is the position of entertainment economics and digitization? I mean, in general, I mean, I don't think we have any a priori position on topics, but we actually if a paper is good, any topic that is relevant for cultural economics is fine. I'll leave you to answer, Doug, the others. Because,
I think that's right. As individual editors, it's not, we don't have a policy on it, but we're going to take input from our editorial board if things might not fit in the scope and we're not sure on the boundaries. Some of these things are about technology. It's about video on demand as a technology, not about the content and its cultural pieces to it. So that's a different matter. It wouldn't necessarily fit if it's actually just about the technology. It has to involve something about the content. But I think there's some open questions. For instance, video games. We've published on video games before, but in some ways, the best way to make the video game publication work is to make it relate to more conventional cultural topics as well. So do video games substitute for attending the cinema? That's one way to do it. I'd like to see us grow into some of these other areas as valid in their own right. And I also want to say, before, as Federico's, I'm sure going to be picking out another question for me to answer. There's a lot of good questions up here, too many to answer in our time, but I'm going to go and type in answers as long as I can, even after this ends, into the Q&A. So check back in later. I'll give you other answers, because there's some great stuff there.
Yes, well, I read some other questions. Do you have, can you say something about the book review process? Yes. Well, we have an editor for this that is relatively independent in this side. He picks the books and sends to reviewers, and then we get them to be published. In the future, we have some idea maybe to expand if there is possibility. There are enough books to expand this option with some also more maybe more technical econometric if it's needed review. Other than that, the review process is standard as in, I guess, in other journals. Do you have any data about subscribers, readers, and downloads? Some of them are made public by Springer. I don't know, Doug, maybe you know more than me.
Yeah, we get data where they tell us how many downloads, for instance, we get every year, and our download rate in 2020 is, I mean, it's gone up by a factor of 3 in the last 10 years. We've probably grew by 40% year over last. We'll get 140,000 full text request downloads, for instance. Our subscription base is going up, but most interestingly, the traction we get, the usage, as Springer of our is actually growing substantially. Are the most downloaded. And it's interesting because the ones that are most downloaded do not line up well with those that have the largest impact in terms of impact factor and in terms of future citations. But if you write things on Bollywood, you're going to get downloaded. I can tell you that.
Are the full papers presented at the conference automatically considered for evaluation? No, it doesn't work like this. There is a normal submission process. Everybody is free to submit. There is an exception for a prize that implies an automatic process of review, which is the President's Prize. Other than that, any paper presented here or not presented here is the same for us, and we follow the usual process if it is submitted. You're all welcome to submit.
Let's see. There was another question. Yeah, so for Amy about the book review, just contact Michael Hutter, and hopefully you guys can have that conversation. And everybody, you're excited about the paper you presented here at the ACEI, submit it to us once it's ready, please.
Maybe we should add that you typically don't get unsolicited book reviews, even if somebody tries. But no, we have a book editor, and he manages the process.
I see a question here from Laura, maybe the first one here, about qualitative studies, conceptual work, and lit analyses. So the percentage of qualitative studies that we publish, I don't know off the top of my head, but it would be a very small number. That's not by design or intent. It's more a function of the quality of the material, the submissions we get, and the share of the submissions we get that are qualitative is also very, very low. We get almost none that are actually, at least economics. We get some fairly journalistic, descriptive pieces, but if they're not pursuing a research agenda that involves testing falsifiable hypotheses, as far as whether it's qualitative data or quantitative data isn't really the issue. It's really whether or not it's conducting that sort of research. As far as lit reviews go, or conceptual work, well, the conceptual work, if it's building theory and developing theory, we'd really like to see some of it. We'd like to see more of it. I think the field needs it. I think the journal needs it. I think Federico agrees. So get working on that. Let's see some stuff. And as far as lit reviews or literature analyses, we do occasionally get some. We don't get a lot, but it's not that we have a rule against publishing it. The real question here is whether or not the work is adding to the literature, whether it's finding some new insights rather than just recapping what other people on their own. So that's the systematic and analysis part of your question. And as long as you're bringing in something systematic and analytical, you're testing some hypotheses or finding something new, then that's something that's very much interesting to us. In fact, my most highly cited paper in the Journal of Cultural Economics is a meta-analysis of literature. So you've got an editor here who's maybe predisposed favorably towards this kind of work, and yet we don't publish many because we don't get much.
But thank you. I think that the last comments are congratulating with you, Doug. So we don't have more questions. And
we should end on that note.
Yes. But since we are almost at the end of the conference, not yet, but almost, let me conclude together with you by thanking all the organizers. This is an impressive conference in spite of the situation, but to some extent it was even better organized. The timing is always perfect. So it's 3 o'clock. I have to stop. Thanks to Browning, Trine, Alan, and everybody else who organized this so well. And please submit to Journal of Cultural Economics and just write about it.
Thank you. And thank you, Federico.
Thank you.